Welcome back, guys, to another episode of On the Shelf. Today, we're discussing Rage 2. Now, Rage 2 is the newest game by Avalanche Studios in a collaboration with ID Software, the guys who actually made the first Rage back in like 2010, I believe, if I remember straight. If anyone reads anything I ever post, was actually mentioned in my top 10 anticipated games of 2019. I was actually fairly high up there. And so the question becomes, is this game a worthy successor, and does it compete with the other post-apocalyptic games we've gotten this year? We've gotten Far Cry New Dawn, we've gotten Metro Exodus, which was an absolute gem. If you haven't checked that out, go check out that review. Go get that game. Obviously, Days Gone, the PS4 exclusive, another game that I reviewed. And if you haven't checked that out, go check that out. So where does it stack up to these games? And can it hold its own with some of the rumors and the talk that has come around it? Well, I want to go ahead and do a deep dive on that and actually talk to you and actually do something that I haven't done before and really make a genuine comparison to another game that the game is being compared to. That very game is actually another game by ID Software, and that is Doom.
You've returned. The only flesh and blood to walk between dimensions. Between our world and theirs.
So the first comparison to Doom that I want to make with Rage 2 is obviously the difference in layouts and game design. Where Rage 2 is an open world game, Doom is a semi-open world, like somewhat linear shooter. You can obviously backtrack and you can visit previous areas in Doom, but really it's more along the lines of you push forward and to get to the next objective, to get through to the next mission. So it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of caught up in between that linear / semi-open world kind of design. The reason why Rage 2 doesn't hit the same chords as Doom when it comes to its combat, even though the combat is very familiar and very similar in the way that they're both very exciting, very fun, very visceral, very fast-paced, is because of that difference in design. A lot of people have pointed out that Rage 2 is the open world Doom. And the reason why this does not work is because with Doom you had a very structured, layered system in place to where it always felt like there was a foot on the gas pedal to build that tension. And sometimes it'd take it off a little bit, and other times it'd slam it to the ground. But the foot was always on the gas pedal. It always made you feel, while, don't get me wrong, the combat obviously is aimed to make you feel powerful, it obviously adds a layer of tension as, you might get a few moments to breathe, but then all of a sudden you're going to be in a room full of demons, and varied demons, doing different things. Some of them are going to be charging you, some of them are going to be throwing things at you, some of them are going to try to get behind your legs and be, demon as a table as one of them pushes you over. But joking aside, it works so well because it always makes sure that there's a level of tension throughout the gameplay, always. And it mixes that well with the music, it mixes that well with other things in the environment as well. You can kind of almost tell when you get to a particular room, or you see a particular opening, and you know that trouble is waiting on the other side of it. And that also raises that tension, it's that atmosphere. Rage 2 doesn't quite hit these same chords because of the fact that it's open world. So the time gaps between action and obviously not action are very much different than in Doom, where you might have 3 to 5 minutes or more of just straight action, of you shooting things, blowing things up, punching something's eye out. There's always this, there's always a lot of combat followed by maybe a minute or two of cooldown where you're kind of, maybe getting a cutscene, or maybe you're getting, dialogue talk to you, or maybe you're, going to the next area to immediately then be bombarded with more enemies. Rage 2 on the other hand, the biggest issue is the fact that you clear an area of enemies and then you have to hop back in your car and you have to drive around for a little bit before you find another bunch of enemies. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of places where there's a lot of enemies, but it just takes you out. Because it's not like you can really run from one place to another, because while in the car it might only take you a couple minutes to get to the area, and it does take you out, to run to the next area is twice as long, twice as boring, and that's the biggest problem. The thing that was supposed to fill in the gap for Rage 2, where, obviously you take the foot off the gas pedal in a way, and make it where you're not fighting just mobs of enemies, was supposed to be the vehicular combat. But here in this game, the vehicular combat, while it is enticing and it is good, there's not nearly enough of it, and there's not enough variations of vehicles and enemies to take on. There's only like 1 or 2 bosses, vehicle bosses that are different, where, you would think that there'd be a lot more. Coming from the studio with Avalanche, that vehicular combat, is something that's praised in Mad Max. I didn't get a chance to ever play Mad Max, but for the people who have said, hey, it wasn't a great game, but the thing that was really great in it was its vehicle combat and the vehicles itself. It doesn't shine here. Either this wasn't their A+ effort. Maybe they didn't have quite the same team, the same group that put together Mad Max, that put this game together. I'm not entirely sure. There are some things with the vehicular combat that do work. Things like, the ability to go ahead and obviously customize and to level up your main starting vehicle, the Phoenix. There are some great moments with the combat, with guns and the gunplay and stuff like that. While some of the vehicles feel very tanky and are sometimes a little annoying to operate, the motorcycles in this game are even worse. And maybe it's because I just got done playing Days Gone not even a month ago. The driving with the motorcycles here is just really bad. You can't go too fast or you're going to go flying off to the right and exploding, and it's really annoying. And to be honest with you, after hearing so much praise just dumped on to Avalanche Studios for their vehicles and the driving and their vehicular combat, I'm a little, color me a little underwhelmed with what really came of. There is a lot of potential still there, but potential is a dangerous word, as there's a lot of games that have potential, but they never wind up ever achieving it. That's not to sit there and say that I don't want Avalanche Studios to ever not touch Rage 3. I'd like them to sit there and touch Rage 3. Obviously not inappropriately, but I would like to sit there and see them maybe get another whack at it, and to see them come out swinging even harder and trying to get that ball even further. And with that actually kind of comes that second comparison with Doom's linear / semi-open world design versus Rage 2's open world design, are the graphics and the details. Now, while Rage 2 is a good looking game for the most part, there's nothing that stands out that makes me look at it and go, oh wow, that's really ugly. However, when you compare it to Doom, it's night and day. When you compare the two, it winds up making it where Rage 2 winds up looking inferior, even though the game is 3 years newer than Doom. And while I understand too that it's hard to put that much detail, in an open world game compared to a more linear structured game, I do understand that, and I don't want to be that guy. At the same time, it goes back to the whole idea that, in my eyes, Rage 2's world, while at times can be beautiful, is far too large. There are times where you're going to stop and look and be like, who? It feels like Ubisoft designed this. A shout out to Ubisoft. In the sense that there's just a massive world with stuff put into it. At times, the game can feel nuanced in the fact that things kind of happen whether you're really paying attention or not. And it feels less scripted that way. And that's why certain games that have taken on that semi-open world / open world formula like Days Gone or Metro Exodus have succeeded in my eyes, is because those worlds feel alive. That things are happening whether you're there to witness them or not. That kind of, the tree does make a sound whether you're in the forest or not when it falls over. While Doom has far more detail, and that is kind of what stands out to me, it's not just the detail in the graphics, it's the detail in the world. The design, being able to sit there and to get to certain high places, finding secret rooms, finding, other things like weapon upgrades and, new weapons and stuff like that are littered throughout the environment, that it feels like there's something around every corner. Some of it's dangerous, while some of it is obviously life-saving. With Rage 2, that's sort of the case, but they're so spread out far and few between that it makes it where you feel less immersed in this world. Honestly, it could go either way. And if there's a Rage 3, I would like to see it change in one of two ways. Either it can sit there and shrink its world a little bit and focus it up more. Days Gone is a fairly massive map as well. However, it doesn't feel nearly as massive for a couple of reasons. While the driving mechanics and the vehicle combat obviously aren't nearly as prominent in Days Gone, the danger comes in the fact that there are hordes, and there are creatures that will yank you off your bike. There are things that are always kind of popping in, and that are always going to sit there and give you a run for your money, so it feels like the world is alive and unforgiving. Whereas Rage 2, there are moments it feels like that, but a lot of moments it doesn't. There are some times where one time you'll go down the road to go do something, and you'll have authority ships spawning in and dropping guys and nuking shit on the ground. You'll have a couple of enemy factions fighting each other in the ditch. Or you'll wind up having those boss vehicles that I mentioned earlier, or groups of bad guys driving by that will try to pick a fight with you. However, then you go ahead and you go out at another point in time, and suddenly there's nothing there. It's like you're the only one in the entire desert. There's no noise, there's no enemies, there's no nothing. And it happens more often than you'd like it to. So when you have to pick up and move to new areas all the time, it kills all that tension, and it kills all that buildup and that adrenaline pumping, like I'd mentioned earlier. But even more so, it makes it though too where it shows just how little detail is here compared to something like Doom. And that's where it feels like sometimes the combat is wasted. Because that was the big thing that we were sold on with Rage 2. They mentioned that with Rage 2 that the campaign wasn't going to be the main focus, that there was going to be less emphasis on it, that it might not be very long. They did say that. They did warn us. And I'm not really mad about that. However, what I am mad about is the things that you compromise one thing for aren't up to snuff in my eyes to sit there and grant it a pass. That's the problem. With Doom, the story is good. I won't say it's super strong. It's not going for some deep level message. It's not. But it makes up for the lack of a talking protagonist per se, like we have here in Walker for Rage 2, for a silent protagonist who can get his thoughts and feelings across just through visual imagery. Him slamming things, or throwing things, or stomping the shit out of something, emphasizes the anger and the rage in your main protagonist. The level of hate he has for demons when he's ripping them apart. You can feel it with every single fiber in his being. There's a lot less emotion in Walker. Yeah, you'll get different tones in his voice, but you don't really get much out of him other than that. He'll answer questions and he'll talk back, but there's not much there. There's not a lot of depth. I felt more depth with Doom Guy, and, Doom Guy has no fucking lines in the entire game. And that's the problem. Doom doesn't have a super huge, like I said, deep story. But what makes up for it is obviously the amazing combat and the good lore and story that we do have that kind of helps bolster it. Where they said that they wanted to focus on having a fun world and great combat. They managed to nail the combat, but the fun world isn't really there. Some of the boss battles are very same feeling. There are some different variations here and there, but really, you're just going to pull out the smart rocket and blow its face off. That's what you're going to do. There are different reasons why you're going to want to take on certain bosses, clear out certain hives, find certain arcs, do certain things in this world, because you're going to want to go ahead and find weapons and upgrades and abilities, which are great. They are great. Those are the best parts of the game. That's what made me want to keep going. But there's no purpose really other than to just watch stuff be blown into bits to do it. And there's not enough enemies, it feels like sometimes, where you'll get 5 enemies here, maybe 20 enemies there. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there's decent variations, but just you get these small groups of enemies and you have to go so far to find another group, and you can't go on foot, you have to drive. That is a stark difference between the two. And that's why it works for Doom, and it fails so miserably for Rage 2. So because of all the things that I've mentioned, shows just how much of a lack of identity that Rage 2 really has. Now don't get me wrong, yes, it is fun, and yes, it can be a crazy ride, and yes, some of the characters are great, but the reality is it really does lack its true identity. I even had my girlfriend at one point even make a mention that the game looked like Borderlands. And I'm not sure if that was a insult or a compliment on her part, but the reality is it shows that obviously the game didn't do much in a way to really make itself feel more distinguished and different. And it's sad that, maybe it might act or kind of feel like Borderlands in a way. Where it really hurts itself is the fact that it's not nearly as entertaining as Borderlands. Borderlands is an open world game, but obviously it makes up for that in a variety of ways that really Rage 3, if they ever wind up coming up with it, could learn lessons from that. And I've lately, for some reason, maybe it's because of the Borderlands 3 hype, I've been comparing a lot of games to Borderlands, and it's not completely intentional, but Borderlands is a great example for a lot of different reasons. The point being is a lot of people will sit there and argue that, well, Doom, open world Doom can't work. It won't work. And I disagree with that. It can work. But the formula needs to be continued to be tweaked. And the other thing that needs to happen is there needs to be more of an emphasis on story. With Doom, it can get away with it because of the consistent action. And while I think that maybe they could make some tweakings and make it where the action is a bit more consistent, what really Rage 2 needs to do is set itself a bit apart from Doom. Instead of making it where it's just got one big baddie that you're trying to take out, why not focus on having, the different factions have their own leaders? Some of them you can sit there and team up with, and some of them you can try to topple. Why don't you have it to where you've got interesting characters? Why bring the characters back from Rage 1 if you're going to give them really not much screen time or air time or time to be fleshed out? Why take this game to 30 years into the future when you had such an interesting event happen right after the ending of Rage 1? These are all things that really this game desperately needed to try to either answer or fill, and it didn't. It did none of that. And while, yes, it's commendable that like I said, they had a focus, and they were like, well, we want it to be fun and engaging, and we want the combat to be great. That's wonderful, but you missed the mark on that. And that's really why a lot of people are just kind of suffering with the game. That doesn't mean the game's bad. It's not bad. It's not like there's like game-breaking bugs. There's not, anything that makes you just absolutely hate this game. I mean, obviously, unless you're not much of a fan of open world, you're gonna be. I mean, especially Assassin's Creed games, you'd hate this game. But if you like really great combat and and you do genuinely like most open world games, you'll have fun with this game. But obviously, I feel like it's just a step below being a good game or a great game. It's an okay game. I might even sit there and compromise and say it's a good game, but it's not a great game. And that's because there's just too many lulls in the action, and the story's not intriguing enough to make you keep going. There's not enough reasons for you to keep going. And that's where the lack of identity comes from. No matter how many neon lights they have, or crazy bandits, or any of that other stuff, The fact that it really lacks a lengthy, compelling story is what hurts this game the most. There's only so many side missions you're going to want to do and so many question marks you're going to want to unveil before you're like, okay, I'm tired of this. And move on to something else. Some of it, yes, happens organically, and there's some things that they did absolutely right here. Some of the missions do happen organically. The problem is that for some reason, some of the missions you pick up are extremely hard to find. They're just buried in your logs. Kind of a strange design choice. But a lot of things, though, do happen organically. It's just more of it needs to happen organically. Examples can still be taken to this day from Skyrim. Games like Skyrim and The Witcher 3, side quests and missions happen organically with just random people you just randomly meet. People that you'll just walk up and see in this, in the town square and be like, hey, that person looks interesting, what's going on with them? And you'll walk up to them. There's the infamous story with Skyrim where you'll just wander through the forest and there's a talking dog who's like, hey, there's a mace that talks to me over there. And you're like, holy shit, I was just trying to catch butterflies. There's tons of things and lessons that can be learned from games like Skyrim, even though Skyrim is 8 years old to this day. Because Skyrim got a lot of things right. Even though in some instances it's still kind of a buggy mess, the reality is that there's still so many things that game got right. That's the reason why people still play that game to this day. And so more than anything, Rage for the next game really needs to figure out its identity. Rage 1 really lacked one until the very end of the game. And got everybody hyped up for Rage 2, only to not take place right after Rage 1, but 30 years later, when all the cool stuff, disappeared and was no longer around, and gave us another generic villain that could have had potential, but instead, it's just another generic villain. So in the end, Rage 2, the combat is really solid, the soundtrack's actually not too bad, the graphics are fairly decent, and the abilities are phenomenal to play around with. However, it really lacks an identity to help it stand itself apart from other games. Having generic villains and generic bandits and generic this only to be painted in neon pink is not enough to give us a compelling enough game to sit there and want to play for 40, 50, 60 hours. Especially when the main campaign, in fact, can be beaten in within 8 to 10 hours. That's not good enough. And I feel like they need to get back to the drawing board. There's a lot of great lore and a lot of great characters within this world, yet they're never utilized. They weren't utilized in Rage 1, they're not utilized here. And it's kind of upsetting because somebody out there took the time to write these characters and to flesh them out, but then nobody wants to use them. And it makes me so angry. The fact that the open world just feels a little too open and a little too empty is a problem. It really does sit there and grind my gears when, there's so much potential, and that's a key word. It's a word I hate to use, but it's a word that can be both used negatively and positively. In here, it's negative. There's a lot of potential in not just the lore and story, but also in the vehicles, in the combat, in so many things, in the open world design. Yet, it's off just a little bit. And it just throws the whole thing into being kind of a mess. And to feeling kind of shallow and empty. There's only so many enemies I'm going to want to sit there and to turn into bits, and to sit there and splat against a wall, and to sit there and blow up with a rocket before I'm like, okay, I'm bored now. Because there's no end game, there's no compelling story, there's nothing that makes you want to sit there and get back at it. Games like, in the Metro series, or games like The Witcher 3, or games like Skyrim, are so replayable, not just because of the character choices, that obviously aids a lot in it, but also because of the phenomenal characters, and the great storytelling, and so many other things. And then to tie that in, they have great combat, or they have great world design, and it all ties together to make it where it's such a joy, not a chore to play. And sometimes, there are times where Rage 2 can be a chore. I put in 30 hours, and to be honest with you, not all of it was fun. There was a lot of fun in it, but not enough for me to be like, yeah, I'm going to drop $60 on this. So that comes to my final verdict for Rage 2. And sadly, it's a 7 out of 10. I believe that it's better than some of the more lesser games this year, like Anthem or Crackdown 3. Anthem being a buggy, terrible mess even to this day, and Crackdown 3 just being boring. Even the combat in Crackdown 3 wasn't nearly as fun as this. And it's sad because this game has so much going for it. And like I said, it's just this far away from being an 8 or a 9, even a 9 out of 10. If they would have really dug into the lore, maybe they would have given us something that is even more compelling, then maybe this game really could have been something great. But it didn't take any of the lessons that were learned from Rage 1, other than the combat. But even then, Rage 1's combat really wasn't that bad. So that'll be it from me, guys. I hope you find this useful. And I'm sorry I didn't get this out a little bit sooner. But what did you guys think of Rage 2 if you've played it? Let me know in the comment section below. Reminder to like and share this video if you can one last time. And I will see you guys on the next On The Shelf. Bye, guys.